Shalom, my dear friends. There are simply no words. The mind is overwhelmed and the heart is crushed. We are experiencing a catastrophe, the likes of which we have not seen since Auschwitz. Even in our worst nightmares, we could not conjure such horrors as we witnessed this week. And any words we might come up with will be inadequate. The only thing to say, as we attempt to cope with our overwhelming grief and sorrow, shock and pain, are the words of the holy eternal Torah, whose power and meaning far exceeds the limits of their form. So friends, I dedicate today's lesson in honor and in memory of the holy people who gave their life in sanctification of God's name. This upcoming Shabbat is called Shabbat Bereshit. It is also Erev Rosh Chodesh Cheshvan, which is the day before the month of Cheshvan. While not officially considered a day of special sanctity, this Erev Rosh Chodesh occupies a special place. And when it falls on Shabbat, as it will be this weekend, we mark it with reading a special Haftorah about the story of David and Jonathan, which begin with the words, Vayomer lo Yahanatan machar chodesh, which means Jonathan says to him, tomorrow, David, is the new moon. What is the story? It's actually one of the most touching stories in the Tanakh, describing in vivid terms the love and sacrifice of Jonathan for David. It is such a deep love that the Mishnah says this is the gold standard of a love, which is called ahava she'ena tluya b'davar, a love that is unconditional. It is not dependent on anything. The story goes that David was fearful of his father-in-law, King Saul. 2 years earlier, David was succeeded in defeating the military threat of the Philistine giant called Goliath. And his fame rose amongst his people. And he rose to the ranks of becoming a senior commander in the Jewish army. So King Saul married his daughter Michal to David. But as David was becoming more and more popular, the king began to feel threatened. He realized that if David's popularity will continue, the next king is not going to be his son Jonathan, but David. And the monarchy will then be transferred from the house of Benjamin, whose Saul was a descendant, to the house of Judah, where David was a descendant. So the king began to pursue David, and David realized that he might be in danger. And David was constantly had to be on the lookout, and he had to gauge the king's feelings and the king's intentions. He never knew when it was safe to be around the king. So for help, David turned to his brother-in-law, his best friend, Jonathan. Now really, Jonathan was like his competitor for the throne, as he was the son of the king. But David knew he could rely on Jonathan, because they had such a deep love for each other's soul. So David confided in Jonathan about his predicament. And Jonathan devised a plan with David. He said, as the Torah Haftorah says, Yonasan said to him, that means Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new moon, it's Rosh Chodesh, and you will be remembered because your seat will be empty. In Hebrew, nifkadata ki paked moshavecha. So Jonathan told David that the following day, Rosh Chodesh, there's going to be a family gathering for the king's family for a festive meal in the king's palace, and that David should leave his seat where he would normally sit empty, and like this he'll be remembered. He says, but when I'm going to see the king's reaction to your absence, I will be able to gauge the current temperature and see, is he angry, is he not angry, is he calm? And Jonathan goes on to tell David a special system, how he's going to give him that signal if his father was angry or not. He said, after Rosh Chodesh, David should hide in the field. And Jonathan is going to take 3 arrows and he's going to shoot them. And he's going to send a young youth to retrieve them. He says, if I say to the youth, behold, the arrows are on the side of you, take it and come. Because you know what that means? Everything is fine. Dad is okay. But if I say to the youth, behold, the arrows are beyond you, you better go, you better run, because your life is in danger. That was a little ploy he had. And what happened? The next day, the royal family gathered for the feast. And David's seat remained empty. The king was silent. He was thinking, you know what? Maybe David didn't come today. Maybe he was in a state of ritual impurity. But when David failed to come the next day, it was really the second day of Rosh Chodesh, the king, he was, whoa, what's going on? He turned to Jonathan, he said, Jonathan, why didn't the son of Yishai, which is David, come to the meal either yesterday or today? So Jonathan, he calmly explained, he says, Dad, David told me in advance that he's going to be eating with his family in Bethlehem, in Beis Lechem. But the king, he was very angry. He said, Jonathan, you're a son of a straying woman deserving of punishment. Did I not know you're going to choose the side of the son of Yishai? For all the days that the son of Yishai is living on this earth, you and your kingdom will not be established. He said, and now, send and take him, bring him to me, because David is condemned to death. And the verse continues that Jonathan said to his dad, why should he be put to death? What did he do wrong? But King Saul lost control. He took his spear, he grabbed it, and he wanted to strike his son. And at this point, Jonathan knew that it was decided upon by his father that David's going to be put to death. And now he had to implement his plan. So as agreed, the next day, Jonathan went out to the field where David was hiding, and he shot the arrows, just as planned. And when David heard Jonathan's cry out the words, the arrow is beyond you, he knew that was the signal he had to flee. The young lad departed, and David came out of his hiding place. David and Jonathan, they hugged, they kissed each other, they wept, and this was their last meeting. Now, friends, if you look at the text that says, Jonathan says, V'nifkadata ki yipaked moshavecha. It's very striking when you look at these words, because in Hebrew, the word pakad has two opposite meanings. On the one hand, it means missing, like no man was missing. On the other hand, pakad also means remember. As we say on the Rosh Hashanah, V'Hashem pakad Sarah. God remembered Sarah, and he promised to bless her and Abraham at an old age to have a son. So thus, Jonathan is telling David, V'nifkadata ki yipaked moshavecha. He's saying the word twice. And what is he saying? And translated into English, you will be remembered because your seat will be empty. Why did Jonathan use this phraseology, specifically using the same root for the two opposite meanings, meaning to say remembered and missing? It means you remembered because your seat is empty? I mean, it may have been a nice ring to it, sound a bit poetic, but in such a dire moment when David's life was possibly on the line, why does he have to have these word games? Why couldn't he say things clearly? And another question is, really, what's the connection between the Haftorah and Erev Rosh Chodesh? I mean, Haftorah you read on Shabbat is really the part that you read after the Torah reading. It's supposed to relate to the theme of the portion on the occasion or the occasion that it is read. But in this case, other than the fact that the Haftorah begins with the words of Machar Chodesh, which means tomorrow is Rosh Chodesh, because the story happened to take place on Erev Rosh Chodesh, there's no thematic connection at all between the story the Haftorah describes of David and Jonathan and the day of Erev Rosh Chodesh, the day it is read. I mean, this same story would have been the same if it would have taken place on any other day or any other holiday or any other occasion which the family would have gathered for a meal. That's when the story could have happened. What's the connection? So friends, this question was actually addressed by several of our Chabad Rebbes. The Alter Rebbe speaks about it, and the Rebbe spoke about it. And they delved into this and found such a profound message. The Rebbe says, the obvious and moving connection between the core message of the idea and the complex times in which we find ourselves is surely no coincidence. And the Rebbe spoke about this in 1984. And it's so applicable to what's going on in the world now. He says we are remembered because we are missing. What does it mean? Being missed and being remembered are not really opposites. Rather, they're two sides of the same coin. Because a person may be present by being present. But sometimes his presence is much more powerfully pronounced and felt when he's absent. Sometimes it's precisely when one is missing that his presence is so strong and so real that that it just can't be forgotten. As Jonathan told David, V'nifkadeta ki paked, which means you will be remembered because you will be missing. That means the king's reaction to your absence will be the true sign of his feelings about you. And this, the Rebbe explains, is the theme of Erev Rosh Chodesh. What is Erev Rosh Chodesh? It is the peak of the moon's absence. It's 2 weeks after a full moon. Every day it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And by Erev Rosh Chodesh, it becomes completely obscure. Gone in the darkness of the night. But friends, it's at this precise moment the birth of the new moon. A new reality emerges from darkness. It is at this moment when something is born from nothing. And therefore, Erev Rosh Chodesh, when we read the Haftorah called Machar Chodesh, about David and Jonathan, it's not just about the date on the calendar mentioned in the beginning of the Haftorah, but a meaningful expression of the day's theme of hope and renewal. And to apply these thoughts to the situation at hand, our nation, the world, is grieving as it accompanies the victims from this false world to the world of truth. Innocent babies and children who have yet to live. Adults who harmed nobody and only brought light to this world, gunned down in cold blood, torn from their families, abused and terrified in the most horrific ways imaginable. Heroic security guards, first responders, police officers, soldiers on duty, and those without even being asked, dropped everything they were doing and jumped into the fire, facing 1,500 savage terrorists, sacrificing their lives to defend their people and their land. What can we make of this? I don't know. But I do know that the Torah tells us you will be remembered because you are missing. That means precisely because these people are missing, they will be remembered and live on forever. In this world, they live short years, but they will live on eternally. They live eternally because they were murdered for being Jews, slaughtered only because they represent our patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and our matriarchs, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And the Torah's promise of the eternal, unbreakable bond between the Holy Land and the Holy People. Friends, the Talmud actually tells a story of a holy man by the name of Rabbi Yosef. He was the son of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. He actually fell ill and he nearly died. He had an outer body experience as his soul temporarily ascended on high. And when he came back to his life, his father asked him, "What did you see? After all, not every day does someone return from the world to come." And he said, "Dad, I saw an upside down world. I saw that those who are considered important in this world were insignificant in the next world, while those who are insignificant in this world were high up status in the next world." And he added, "I also heard that they were saying, those who were executed by the government enjoy such an exalted status that no one can stand in their enclosure. No soul," he said, "no matter how great a tzaddik or a Torah scholar one may be, could stand as close as to the divine presence as those people that were executed for being Jewish in the sanctification of God's name." What was he talking about? The Talmud explains that Rabbi Yosef was actually referring to the martyrs, two famous Jewish martyrs called Paphos and Lulianos. They were from a city called Lud. And around the year 100 CE, the daughter of the Roman emperor was murdered. And the suspicion fell on the Jews. And the Roman emperor planned to take revenge on the entire Jewish community. God forbid. But these two brothers falsely admitted to the crime, thus protecting their brethren, and they gave up their lives al Kiddush Hashem, the sanctification of God's name. Who could possibly fathom the exaltedness of the victims of this week's terror? They were simply killed for being Jews. They are remembered eternally in this world, in our hearts, and in the world to come, at the very foot of the divine throne of glory, because they are missing. And these pure Kedoshim, these pure holy souls, They are remembered because they are missing also in another sense. Because there are countless stories that are emerging over the past few days of those who heroically shielded others with their own bodies, taking the bullets themselves, but granting years of life to survivors and their descendants for generations to come. They themselves, they went missing for one reason, so that their fellow Jews could be through the end of the generation. One such story I read about a Jewish man called Amichai Whitson. He was from a little town called Kerem Shalom near the Gaza border. And when the sirens blared last Shabbat in the morning at 6:30, it was Simchas Torah. Amichai, he was a member of the security team in the village. Together with 8 other members of the team, they headed for the guard posts. And there were 6 other soldiers, IDF soldiers, who joined them. But unfortunately, they were outnumbered and overwhelmed with hundreds of terrorists who flooded the village. And this village was being defended by 15 men. For 6 hours, Amichai ran and shot those terrorists, the attackers. He passed by his house and he called out to his wife through the window to say everything was under control. But please, my dear wife, please make sure to take our 5 children and remind them today is Simchas Torah, a time to dance. But just a short while later, a terrorist snuck up to the back of Amichai. He shot him in the back of his head and he killed him from behind. And at the funeral, Amichai was eulogized by his father, Rabbi Shlomo Yosef Whitson from the city of Psagot. And he said the following words. He said, "Son Amichai, you lived 33 years, but you lived hundreds and thousands of years because with your body, you gave life to adults and children and their children's children for all generations." Indeed, the memory of the Kedoshim of these holy souls endures forever in this world and the next. Yet, friends, we cannot be satisfied with memory alone. Yes, the holy soul basks in the divine glory, but that doesn't give us any comfort. It is incumbent upon us, this great duty here and now, to do everything in my power and in your power to ensure that their blood was not shed in vain. Their memory must remain amongst us as a vivid reminder of why they were murdered. In their last breaths, they cried out to us, remember who the true enemy is and remember who we really are. Remember how deep that bond is between us and our responsibility to another. My fellow brethren, brothers and sisters, this is the great task before us. We cannot return to business as usual. We must not continue, God forbid, as though nothing had happened. Instead, we must reflect on what this war demands of us. And first and foremost, to come together now more than ever before. We must again be our guarantors. Every one of us must go out of our comfort zone and think, what positive thing can I do for my fellow Jew in thoughts, speech, and action? This is the time, friends, for every community to launch a new initiative for the souls of the fallen. We must increase in putting on tefillin, in lighting the Shabbos candles, in giving tzedakah, charity, in Torah study, and above all, in Ahavas Yisrael. That means unconditional love, just like the love of David and Jonathan, which we remember on this Shabbat, Erev Rosh Chodesh. It is a day when the darkness in the sky is most profound as there's no moon, but it is the dawn of the brightest tomorrow. And this, friends, is the most everlasting memorial that will uplift them forever in this world and the next. As the prophet states, I will give them in my house and in my walls a place and a name, which means Yad Vashem. Better than sons and daughters, an everlasting name I will give him, which will not be discontinued. Friend, the United States Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was just in Israel just today, and he stated, Parsha Perspective, the portion of Genesis we read this week, begins with darkness. And then he proceeds in the portion about creation of light. But he says, even after light is created, we read about the first murder in history that claimed 25% of the world population. It is when Cain rose up against his brother Hevel, And the Torah tells us there was only 4 people alive in the world. Adam and Chava, which means Adam and Eve, Cain and Hevel, Cain and Abel. And when Hevel fell victim to his brother's blow, when Cain killed Hevel, 25% of humanity perished. Yet how did the world move on? How did Adam and Eve move on after the murder of one son by another? So there's an astonishing midrash in Yalkut Shimoni that describes the aftermath of that story. It says Adam and Eve, they were weeping. They were mourning over the loss of their son Hevel. They didn't know what to do. So they saw a raven who saw his friend, another raven, died. And it said, the raven said, I will teach this man what to do with their son's body. He took his friend, the other raven, he dug a hole in the earth before their eyes and buried it. And Adam said, we'll do like the raven. He took Hevel's corpse and he buried it in the ground. Now, it's a bit of an odd episode, this here. It's a bit strange. Firstly, why didn't Adam and Eve already know what to do to bury their son in the ground? It was, after all, we just read in Genesis that after Adam and Eve were punished for eating from the tree of knowledge, what does it say? By the sweat of the brow you will eat bread until you return to the ground, for you are dust, and to dust you will return. I mean, wasn't it known that a human remains must be buried in the ground? And the truth is that the laws of burial are not very complicated. It's not like establishing an eruv or writing a divorce bill or building a mikveh. Those are complicated Jewish laws. Burial, sadly, is a simple act of digging a hole and putting the body inside. I mean, why did Adam need a whole lecture and a tutorial from the raven? And also, why the raven to teach this lesson? Why not any other animal? Why not a friendly cat or dog or any other animal to serve as the agent to show how burial is done? Friends, there's a very deep, profound lesson here. 82 years ago, in the summer of 1942, as the Holocaust raged throughout Europe, the Rebbe actually participated in an event that was the founding of a Chevra Kadisha, which means a Jewish burial society of the Agudas Hasidic Chabad in the United States. And the Rebbe addressed the members of this new Chevra Kadisha of the burial society, and the Rebbe offered a very profound and enlightening interpretation of this remarkable midrash. And the Rebbe wrote this in his personal notes in a notebook they found in his desk after his passing. And the Rebbe writes that when Adam and Eve were sitting and crying that their son Abel was killed by Cain, they weren't just crying over Abel or Hevel. They were crying over themselves. Basically, they were saying, how could you return to life after experiencing such absolute evil? I mean, where do you get the hope? Where do you regain your hope and your faith in the aftermath of such horror? They were wondering, what's the point of bringing more children into this world if one child can take and so abruptly cut the life off of another child? So God replied, to counteract this evil, I have created an even stronger force, the force of love. Where hatred destroys, love gives life. When faced with evil, the solution must be with doubled and redoubled love. And to stand up against such absolute evil, we must go beyond previously known boundaries and respond with pure, clean goodness for heaven's sake and for no ulterior motive. And that is really the meaning of the raven burying his friend. Because the sages actually tell us that the act of burial is considered a chesed shalemis, which means an ultimate act of self-kindness. Why? Because usually if you do something for someone else, they might do something good for them. They'll do back good for you. But when you bury someone, it's a one-way kindness. You're honoring them and burying them. So it's a true kindness. So actually it was a raven specifically that was chosen to show Adam and Eve about this lesson, because a raven is naturally known to be a cruel bird. The sages tell us in Talmud Ksubos. And the raven is so cruel that it actually abandons its young children and refuses to provide food for the child. And that's why King David writes in Psalm 147 about God, that he gives the animal its food to the young ravens who call out. Why? Because the parents of the raven don't. So God makes sure to provide for the young ravens. So yet, as Adam and Eve grieved for their child and for the future, the heartless raven, upon seeing its friend's carcass lying on the ground, it didn't remain indifferent. It realized that it must go beyond its own natural harshness and afford its fellow fellow raven, final respect, true respect, kindness of truth. And friends, this is God's answer to the horrors of this past week. God is saying, love is much stronger than hatred, and love heals it. Hatred is madness and sickens, but love is the river that flows naturally from soul to soul. Friends, darkness cannot be driven away by broomsticks, kicks and punches, and sticks and stones, but by lighting a match. We banish darkness with light, and we will vanquish the absolute evil with abundant love and care for one another, with good deeds that will illuminate the world with the light of godliness. And may we merit immediately a time when death will be concealed forever, and God will wipe the tears off every face with the true and complete redemption and the revival of the dead, the pure holy ones leading at the head with the coming of Mashiach. May it happen speedily in our days. My friends, chazak v'yamatz. Be strong and be brave. Let us resolve to come together as a community with camaraderie and share words of courage and strength and pure, undiluted love for your fellow brethren, our brothers and sisters. And when our Father in heaven sees how much his children love each other and care for each other, all barriers in heaven will be broken, and he will pour back his love. And he's going to bring such a great miracle. And God bless that all of the captives will come back home. And he will protect every soldier defending the holy land of Israel, the land given to us as an eternal gift. Because he's going to see that we are going to have a love and an embrace for our fellow brethren, as David had for Jonathan, an unconditional love. I wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. The days aren't easy. Let us stand strong. Comfort one another. Embrace one another. Share words of chizuk, of strength. Do a mitzvah. Wrap the tefillin. Light the candles. Give tzedakah. That is the spiritual arms that we can give to help that the holy land of Israel, the eternal land given to us as a gift many, many millenniums ago, will be our eternal homeland for now and forever. Good Shabbos.